Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens, where I look at art and design and fountain pens. You don't have to be an artist to get something from this channel, but you do have to love fountain pens or be at least interested in fountain pens.
Look out down the driveway. Every insurance company in America's out there waving their fountain pens trying to get you to sign up.
Today I'm going to talk about another one of my collections. I think one of the things about fountain pens that people have a misunderstanding about them is that they might think that in order to collect fountain pens, you have to be really rich and you have to buy really expensive pens that are old. There is a whole space in the fountain pen world of what we might call vintage pens, which really just means old, where that is really quite affordable. And I, for example, did a video a few months ago on the Sheaffer student pen, which was the first pen that I ever had, and those pens are really cheap. They were so popular, and they were made for years and years, starting in the 1950s and on into the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And as a result, you can still find them for sometimes like $5 and at flea markets and et cetera, et cetera. And they were incredibly well made, and they lasted. They used cartridges. Well, there's another pen that Sheaffer introduced in the late 60s, early 70s, and that's the NoNonsense pen. No nonsense, all spelled as if it were one word. And that's important to keep in mind because you may know that there's something called no-nonsense pantyhose.
No nonsense fits like no other pantyhose.
And that's no nonsense. I can't think of another example where there are two sort of popular products that are in the market at the same time that have the same name and are so different. So that's an interesting phenomenon. So this is the no nonsense pen. And what's cool about this pen, I think, is that it goes back to really the 1920s and looks very much like a Sheaffer flat top pen or a Parker dual fold pen. So it really is Sheaffer going back to the roots of fountain pens, but it was made out of plastic, or we like to say a resin. I have the original packaging that this came in. You can see it was only $1.98. The Sheaffer student pen was $1, so this is twice as expensive, but nevertheless was very affordable, and it was meant to use cartridges. But because this is a larger pen, there is a converter that works with it that doesn't work with the student pen, and you can still get a converter for this pen. But ideally, it was meant to work with cartridges and be really easy to use. Sheaffer at the same time introduced a whole line of other pens, ballpoint pens. This is a later version of a ballpoint version of this pen, and they had a marker also, and the nibs on these pens, or the sections, are interchangeable. The thing is that the ballpoint pen doesn't have a cap liner to keep the ink wet. So that's a way to tell the difference between the ballpoint. If you take the section off a ballpoint, you can exchange it with a section from a fountain pen, and you have to remove the spring from the bottom, which you can kind of pull out. But the ballpoint pens don't have a liner in the cap, so that's the one thing that would be different. And I suppose there's some kind of a tool that you can use to remove the cap liner from one fountain pen, and you could do some kind of a lobotomy transformation. It seems, I don't know if that's cheating though, because there were many more versions of the ballpoint pen than there were of the fountain pen, but nevertheless the fountain pen came in many different versions, many different colors, and let me just show you sort of the genealogy of that. So here is my collection. So the thing to be said is that if you get a standard no-nonsense pen from the 70s or 80s on eBay, they run under $20. So a pen like it depends on the color, right? So blue and reds tend to be much more available. Yellow it seems to be a little more popular. What I have here is sort of the genealogy. In 1969, I've talked about this before, Sheaffer introduces the Guys and Dolls pen. This is one of the Guy version. The Guy version of the pen has a clip, and they look very close to what the no-nonsense pen eventually became. They came in these sort of brighter, more almost phosphorescent colors, and the plastic is a little thicker, and the feed is a little smaller than a no-nonsense feed. The section is a little smaller than a no-nonsense section. So they're not interchangeable in terms of the nib and the section. In fact, I'm curious that maybe there were other pens that Sheaffer made that might have used the same section. If anybody knows about that, I'd love to hear about that. Anyway, so this is sort of only made for about a year. They did a big advertising campaign. It was very gendered. The female version of it, the lady version of it, didn't have a clip, and it was supposed to be hung around the neck of a woman, while in the ads they show men with them in their pocket. So there was this kind of gendering, and Sheaffer actually did that a lot, and they seemed to stop around 1969. And when the no-nonsense pen comes out, maybe that's part of the name no-nonsense, it was no longer gendered in that way. So now this is one of the things that's difficult for me to sort of figure out, because they made the no-nonsense pen for years and years and years. It's kind of hard to tell whether you have a 70s version or an 80s version or a 90s version, because they're all very similar. I don't think that I have a version from the earliest run of the pen. Supposedly the very first pens were blue and tan. To tell you the truth, I don't think that this is the first blue version. This may be the first tan version, because when I got this one, it came in packaging that, again, came from an early period. But you never know if people have sort of switched out the pens. It's interesting that this one doesn't say Sheaffer on the clip, but this one does say Sheaffer on the clip. And I have read that the earliest versions of the no-nonsense pen have a rubber section rather than a plastic section. So, and all the ones that I have seem to have what looks to me as like plastic sections. So these came just in a variety of colors, more than, in one ad it says 8 different colors, but I know that over the years they changed the colors. The other thing that Sheaffer did is they had a whole department that would customize pens for advertising purposes in companies. So I have a version of the pen that was just made for the Phantom of the Opera. Those tended to be ballpoint pens. They seem to be less likely to turn fountain pens into for these advertising purposes. Often, doctors would get a pen that would be given to them by a pharmaceutical company. So one of the advantages of this pen, the way it was designed, was that it could be easily silk screened on and then personalized. I think that's an interesting aspect to what Sheaffer was doing. In terms of size, this is the standard. It's almost exactly 5 inches long when the pen is closed. And it's interesting to compare that to the old Parker Duofold, which is a bit bigger. right? But it's very similar looking pens, really, when you compare them. When the pen is posted, it actually is it posts very securely, but it gets pretty long. It then is almost 6 inches long. And you can see how it compares in size with Lamy Safari, which is bigger, longer, and here's the Metropolitan. It's a little smaller. So it's kind of in the middle as a pen. Your standard no-nonsense pen weighs around 15 grams. This is with the full cartridge. To load the pen, you take the cartridge and you simply push it in. For some reason it's not doing it. Oh, there it goes. And you just screw this on. I'll give it like a little squeeze. Get the ink going. That's how it works. And then, of course, it takes a little while for the ink to get to the nib. In terms of getting ink into these pens, they're meant to work with cartridges. Script cartridges is what Sheaffer used to call their ink in their cartridges. But you can get converter. In the 60s and 70s, they had a kind of push converter. And the advantage of this converter is that it will work in the old Timer pens, as well as the regular no-nonsense pens. But just a warning, this kind of converter isn't going to fit in a Sheaffer student pen. Subsequently, they have introduced this converter, which is more of a standard type of converter that works in most no-nonsense pens, but it's too long to fit in the old Timer pens. So just keep that in mind if you're going to get a converter. The other solution is to take a empty cartridge like this and a hypodermic needle and some ink like that, and basically use the hypodermic needle, get the ink in here, and then put it into the cartridge and make your own cartridge. And that's the way that you can also get ink into these things. As I said before, the cartridges used to be quite cheap for 5 cartridges, but they've gotten pretty pricey, like as much as $10 for 5 cartridges. So you may want to make your own with this pen. Now, as this pen grew in popularity, they came up with a more deluxe version of the pen, and this is a really beautiful version of the pen. This is the chrome version of the pen that I think is very, very handsome. It's much heavier. It's a very elegant pen. I think it writes. All these pens they all have very similar nibs. It only comes in fine and medium. And the nibs that they use, the stainless steel nibs they use, were very, very reliable. Not crazy smooth, but they wrote perfectly fine. And the other thing to have to say about it is that they lasted. I think that has to do with the fact that people are all using the same cartridges, the same ink, which they were made for. And so these pens have had an incredibly long life, particularly since they were so affordable. Anyway, this is a chrome version of the pen, and this is a really special version of the pen that I have only found, or I didn't find it, but a pen collector in England who started out using these pens. He had two of these pens. This is the blue and this is the red version of these pens, and he actually sent these to me. I was intrigued by them, and you notice that they have this black ring rather than a bronze ring, but otherwise are similar to the silver version of the pen. There are metal versions, it's blue, there's a red that he has, and I have not seen anybody else selling these. They're never on eBay, so I am eternally grateful to him for sending these pens to me, and then I'm sharing them with you. Here's a version of the pen. They call these jelly versions, and they tended to be ballpoint pens, but this was seemingly a fountain pen because it has the cap liner and it's translucent, so it's very, very beautiful, I think. And I have a yellow version of this that is actually originally a ballpoint pen, but I turned it into a fountain pen because I like it so much. All right, so then in later, I think in the 90s, Sheaffer introduced something called the vintage line of these pens, and these are a more deluxe version. They're marbleized. They have a kind of marbleized material, which is kind of attractive, and they are, instead of being silver chrome, they have this sort of brass chrome, and the nib is brass, so it's a more deluxe version of the pen, a little more expensive. And then they came out with a really beautiful line called the Old Timer, and this is meant to go back and look like as if it were made out of ebonite. It's made out of plastic, but it's treated in a way with this chafing that is like the old pens, the old ebonite pens that Waterman made and Sheaffer made, and from the teens and the 20s. And there are supposedly 6 different patterns that they introduced to this pen. I have 2 of them, and the herringbone seems to be the pattern that is the most popular. They also made an old-timer black pen that is just, it was called Le Black, and it's just straightforward, a black pen, but it has this more deluxe. And on these more expensive pens, the old timers, because they were meant to be more expensive, the finial is and the bottom is finished in a more deluxe way. Depending on the version of the pen, they are finished differently. So here's a nice pumpkin-colored regular pen. Regular no-nonsense pen. You can see that it has a sort of insert at the finial and on the bottom, and it's much more obvious that this is created in a plastic mold. If you look at the old-timer version of the pen, it's finished, the top is filled in, and the same thing is true of the bottom, although these are not these are not super expensive pens. When they were new, they were well under $100, and you can still get them for under $100. I mean, I think they were even under $50. The vintage, so-called vintage pen, that has this marbleized plastic that comes in green and red and blue. It has a nice sort of insert here at the top, but not so much at the bottom. Nothing at the bottom. And it has a gold plated nib. None of these pens have 14 karat nibs. The brushed metal has a black insert at the top and a black insert at the bottom. And then same thing about these colored versions, but it's black. The finishes are black, the top and the bottom, but a black clip. And all of these pens, the section can go on any of these. You can switch the sections if you wanted to on any of these pens, and they all would take the ballpoint section. You could replace any of these fountain pen sections with the ballpoint section. The ballpoint pens have springs in the bottom that you have to remove because the cartridge won't fit if you have the spring in the bottom. Now, in the late 80s, they introduced a really deluxe version of this pen called the Connoisseur pen. It's kind of, I guess it's classy. They use the French spelling of Connoisseur to describe this pen. This is a Lavenger Sheaffer collaboration, a later version of that pen, and it has a 14 karat nib that writes really, really beautiful, and it has all this trim that is more deluxe. And in many ways, it's almost not a no-nonsense pen. But you can see it's pretty much the same design except for the top and the bottom. The finials and the bottom are different, and the material is different, but it's sort of the same concept in terms of size. So I find this really interesting. I've talked to so many different fountain pen people who talk about how their first pen is the no-nonsense pen. It's also interesting to see how this pen, I think, got supplanted by the Lamy Safari, and how the Lamy Safari really, I think, is inspired by this pen, but is obviously a more up-to-date, contemporary look. The Safari isn't trying to look like an older pen. It's trying to look like a pen of the future, if anything, while the Sheaffer design, I think, is trying to go for a kind of classic, maybe timeless idea of what a fountain pen should look like. Now, they continue to make the no-nonsense pen, but they changed the name really to Viewpoint. And, they made the no-nonsense pen as a ballpoint pen, but it only as a fountain pen, as a calligraphy pen. And you could get it in kits where there would be like 3 pens and 3 different calligraphy nibs. And I've actually reviewed one of those kits. You can still get those kits. Sometimes they come with 1 pen and 3 different sections. And then that kind of evolved into the Viewpoint, which has a rubber section that no longer will fit into the no-nonsense pen. And also, it doesn't twist anymore. It doesn't screw. It's on a screw top. Just clicks. So that's very different. It still looks very, very similar. And then also, it comes in this demonstrator versions. That's true of the calligraphy pen, so you can see whether you're running out of ink. And now, I think they're still making this. Sheaffer now makes this pen, which has now really evolved a lot. It has this triangular top to it, cut-off top, which I really don't like. It's made out of very lightweight plastic, and it has this window that is cut out. It's much bigger, but similar to the Safari, and it also is calligraphy nib, and it has a rubber section. I think this pen feels very cheap. And it is inexpensive, but I really don't like it. I don't understand why they cut off the top in this way. I think that's ugly, and it's sort of a weird attempt, I guess, to look modern. Anyway, that is sort of where the no-nonsense pen has gone. I think that is with Sheaffer rethinking itself, and now under new ownership, this would be a very smart pen to kind of bring back, I think, in some way. How do these pens write? Well, let's start out with a fine. They come in fine and medium, and then there are also the calligraphy nibs. It's a little confusing. The calligraphy nibs also sort of are called fine, medium, and I guess broad, right? So, but these are the regular nibs, just come in fine and medium. So this is the Sheaffer no-nonsense, and this. This is fine. This is blue black script cartridge. This is rhodia paper. And this is reasonably wet. And there isn't any flex. It is not incredibly smooth. There's a bit of feedback, but it's pleasant, I think. I have a converter in this, so this is using Waterman Intense Black, and again rhodia paper. So really the fine is really like a medium. This particular medium is almost like a broad. Now keep in mind that these pens are often 20, even 30 years old, and they've been used a lot, so they tend to maybe write a little bit thicker than would otherwise be the case. Jumps over the lazy dog. I would say that this medium is actually smoother. I prefer the mediums in the Sheaffer pens, but they're really nice writers, particularly when you keep in mind how affordable these pens initially were. So I think you can tell that I've had really a lot of fun doing research on this and collecting these pens. No pen in this among these this collection, except for the Connoisseur, has cost more than $100. Almost all of the pens here were around $20. The old Timer was pricey. Let me thank Rupert Arzeian for sending me the two beautiful chrome pens. And I just really find these things to be beautiful and delightful. I think that the very popularity of these pens has made it so that we've taken them for granted. I'd love to hear from people who know more about them. I mean, for example, I don't know who was the actual designer of the original No-Nonsense pen. If anybody knows that or knows somebody who knew the person, that person might be dead now, but maybe their children know about it and could contact me about the pen. We often take for granted recent history, and it just sort of disappears until it's too late. So anybody who knows more about these pens or has particular special ones that they have. So as always, if this was useful for you, please subscribe. That's the way to support the channel. We have now reached over 800 subscribers, and I'm really hoping to get above 1,000. That would make my day. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.